Okay, good afternoon,
Добрый
everyone,
всем день,
and
добрый всем день
best
и
regards from
большой привет
Vienna, actually, where
из
I am.
Вены, где
It
я
would be
сейчас
good if
располагаюсь.
the translator could be taken off
И
my ears, because I'm also hearing myself right now in
очень
Russian translation.
хорошо,
So it
если
would be
бы
good if you can stop this.
переводчик
So hopefully you can see
сделал
me
бы так,
all,
чтобы я
and
не слышал
these are
русский перевод в
certainly
своих
exciting times
ушах.
in
И
the treatment
очень
of
хорошо
hepatitis C
всех
virus
увидеть,
infection, which
рассказать о
is really
вирусной
a
инфекции
global
гепатита С, ее
challenge.
лечении.
But
Это
we have
большой глобальный вызов,
issues in every
но у
country to
нас есть
solve.
такие проблемы
And the
в
good
любой
thing is that
стране.
we can
И
share
хорошо будет, вот, если
experiences
бы мы
from
смогли бы
different
поделиться
countries. And
опытом разных
therefore, it's important to have
стран, и
these kinds of
поэтому
exchanges,
очень
to talk to
важно
each other.
проводить такие вот обмены
And I'm
мнениями,
happy to
общаться
share with
друг с
you
другом, и
some
я буду рад с
experiences
вами
real
поделиться некоторыми
world-wise,
наработками, которые были
but
достигнуты вот
also in
в свете
particular our
исследований в реальном
experience
мире. И
in
хочу также
Germany
рассказать о
using
нашем
the new
конкретном
drugs against
опыте в
hepatitis C, which
Германии
is
и
really
использовании новых
exciting
препаратов от
times.
гепатита С.
Before I can
И это
start with
действительно интересные
my presentation on
разработки. И вот
hepatitis
я хочу
C,
приступить сейчас к своей презентации
obviously
по
we have to
гепатиту
talk
С,
about
но
football.
хочу сказать, что мы еще чуть-чуть
Germany
должны
and
обсудить
Ukraine will
футбол.
see each other on
Германия,
Sunday
Украина
nights.
играют
Hopefully
вечером в
this will be a good
воскресенье. Я
game at
очень
the
надеюсь, что это
European
будет
Soccer
хорошая, достойная
Championships.
игра.
And my
Европейский чемпионат
hope
по
is
футболу будет.
that
И я
we will
очень
meet not
надеюсь,
only on Sunday night, but maybe
что мы
again
будем
also should
будем
be
встречаться, будут эти команды встречаться
good during this
дальше,
World
и
Cup.
эти
Let's see what the outcome will be.
команды
But
вообще
now
обе
let's talk
хороши.
about
Посмотрим, как они сыграют. А
football.
теперь
No longer, but let's
не
talk about
будем больше
hepatitis
говорить о
C.
футболе, будем
And
говорить о
my task
гепатите С.
today
И
is to
сегодня
discuss
моя
with you
задача
real
обсудить
world
с вами
experiences on the
опыт
treatment
реального мира, исследования
of
реального мира
hepatitis
по
C.
поводу лечения гепатита С.
The important point
И
is
здесь,
that I also
что
have
у
to
нас
disclose
важно, это то, что я
my
должен
previous
обнаружить и
contacts,
публиковать
and this is
информацию,
moving a
то,
little
что я
too
сделал
fast here right now.
раньше.
Sorry for
И
this.
вот,
Let's move
извините, вот я очень
backwards.
быстро прохожу, сейчас возвращаюсь.
So hopefully this works.
Надеюсь, что вы
And
все
now
видите, все
here we are.
работает. Вот здесь мы находимся с вами.
Sorry, I hope you can see all the slides, but
Надеюсь,
this
что вы
is
все
somehow a
слайды
little out of
можете
control.
видеть,
But let
потому
me
что,
just start
может
by
быть, там не так
telling
переключается.
you
Давайте
that
я
we have
начну с чего.
obviously
Хочу вам рассказать,
a
что
wide range
у
of
нас широкий
data
находится
that have
диапазон
emerged
данных,
during
которые
the
возникли
treatment
в
of
результате
drugs within
проведения
clinical
лечения,
trials.
применения препаратов в
For all
рамках проведения
regimens which are
клинических
approved,
испытаний.
we
Все
have
схемы,
a
которые были
large
утверждены,
number
вот по их поводу
of clinical
у нас
trials.
большое
Many
количество было
patients
проведено
have been
клинических
treated within clinical
испытаний, много
trials.
пациентов
But the
были
problem is
пролечены в рамках
really
клинических
that
испытаний, но проблема
these
заключается в том,
data
что
were generated
данные были
in patients with
генерированы
very
по
well selected inclusion and
пациентам,
exclusion
которые
criteria. The big question is then
демонстрировали, они
obviously,
соответствовали
do
критериям
these
включения,
data translate
исключения. То
also
есть вопрос
into real
заключается в чем?
life?
Могут ли
Maybe
они
someone can help me here
экстраполироваться в реальный мир,
with
в
this
реальную жизнь? Я надеюсь, мне
moving
тут
forward of the
сейчас
slides, a little out of
помогут.
control. I'm
Переключение
not
слайдов,
speaking
тут
that
вроде как
fast.
потерялся
We're
контроль. Я не
almost
так
at the end
рассказываю
of the
на самом деле,
presentation
как
right
они
now.
сейчас
Can you move
переключаются
these
уже
slides,
почти к
please,
концу.
back
Передвинулись.
to the
Можете вы
beginning?
назад вернуться к началу презентации?
So let's stop here.
Давайте здесь
Try it
остановимся
again.
и попробуем снова.
So this should work. Hopefully better now.
Должно
Let's
работать,
moving forward on
надеюсь,
its own.
что
So it's
лучше.
out
Оно,
of my
видите,
control
само
here.
перелистывается, все вышло из-под контроля.
So now technical stuff is helping me,
Иногда бывает техника
but I
барахлит,
will
но,
try to solve this problem in a minute.
но думаю, что эта проблема сейчас решится.
It's a little weird.
Немного необычное, так сказать, явление.
Anyway, so
Но
I
в
think
любом
the key
случае,
message
я думаю,
of
что
this talk
ключевое
should be
сообщение
certainly to discuss
заключается
with
в чем?
you
Мы
the
с вами
data that have been
обсуждаем данные,
generated
которые
in the
были
real world setting.
получены в
There
обстановке
have been
реального мира.
quite some data
Было
in different
достаточное
countries
количество
that have
данных,
been presented
которые
during the recent
взяты были с
meetings.
разных стран, которые
You
были
have
представлены на
some of you have
недавних
attended the
встречах,
International Liver
мероприятиях.
Congress
Вы, наверное,
in
были были
Barcelona,
в Барселоне на
and I
Международном
called
конгрессе
this
по
meeting
гепатологии,
the
и
real
я назвал
world
именно
meeting.
эту
It
встречу
was really
встречу реального
overwhelming
мира,
how many
потому
data
что
have been
именно
presented
изумительно
from
было
different
наблюдать,
countries.
сколько данных у
We
нас
have seen
были с
data
разных стран.
from
Мы
all
видели
over the
данные
world.
со всего мира.
Slightly different
Они немножко
strategies how to use
отличались
the
по
drugs, but I
стратегиям
think we
применения
learned
препаратов,
a lot.
но я
Now
думаю,
let me
что
try it
было
again
очень
here to move back
познавательно. Сейчас
this
вот мы снова
presentation.
пытаемся
So,
назад эту презентацию начать
why are these
сначала.
real-world data so
Вопрос,
important?
почему
And
важны
it
эти
is
данные
because
реального мира?
randomized controlled
Потому
trials
что
cannot answer all
рандомизированные
clinical questions.
испытания
Key
не
clinical data can only be obtained in the real world. And we have here really seen some important differences between real-world data and sorry for this is moving on its own, so we move forward for the next slide, please. Can somebody help me for the next slide? So here we are. So there are basically, as you all know, the randomized controlled trials. They are protocol driven. You have extensive inclusion and exclusion criteria. For some subgroups of patients, they are quite small numbers. We have short durations, and obviously the patients are very well controlled. The big advantage of real-world data is that it evaluates patients in standard care. It's really observational. There are fewer exclusion criteria, and larger and more diverse spectrums of patients are actually studied. And very importantly, we can observe patients not only in the short term, but there's also long-term effectiveness data which are studied in these trials. And therefore, I think they give additional information. The most important thing is obviously that we have not only data that confirm the effectiveness of these new treatments, but also that we have a larger group of whether the new drugs are really safe also in clinical practice. And I think this is really the most important part of this one. And there have been a huge success of real world data in the history of hepatitis C treatment. Many trials have been presented as full papers. These are just a few. I picked it here on this slide. Obviously, now let's go in a little more detail what has actually been presented for hepatitis C. And I will focus in this presentation on the genotype 1 infected patients, in particular 1. When we then have a look at the distribution of patients worldwide, what is the difference between genotype 1A and 1B? I think this is quite interesting, seeing how diverse this spectrum of HCV genotype 1 infection is. While in many countries in Europe, genotype 1B is the most important genotype. In North America, 1A has been being more prevalent, and this is also very important to note because most of the pivotal registration trials for all regimens that we right now use in clinical practice included the majority of patients in North America. So genotype 1A was usually overrepresented in that cohorts, while genotype 1B were usually a smaller proportion of patients studied in that trial. For me, it was interesting to see that in this paper, which I quote here, unknown subtypes is given for the Ukraine. Actually, I learned that you have roughly a 50-50 separation between genotype 1A and 1B. In our country, in Germany, we have roughly 60 to 65% of patients infected with genotype 1B. So the overall message is, and you are well aware of that one, that in clinical trials, all regimens that have been studied in phase 3 trials showed fantastic response rates, SVR rates of 96%, 98%, 99% were reported in almost all trials, which is reassuring that these drugs are really working. But the question then was, on the first hand, these effectiveness data are really confirmed also in the real-world setting. Real-world cohorts have been presented, as I mentioned before, for many countries and many trials. I can here only discuss a small proportion of this data that were described over the last 12 to 18 months. And let's start with the HCV target group. Many of you are aware that the target consortium was present at all the major liver meetings and infectious disease meetings over the last years. We have many sites in the US that contributed to this target cohort. We have also 3 German sites that included patients in this database, and our center at Hannover Medical School is also involved in this target cohort. This is the academic centers mainly, so I think it's good to generate a lot of data, but it may not be really the absolute real world setting, because these sites were usually experienced in treating hepatitis C. They were large volume centers, not only including 3, 4, 5 patients, but quite some patients on a large. Overall message of the target consortium is that yes, the drugs works. The SVR data could largely be confirmed for all regimens. You can see this here for the Simipravir sofosbuvir data, for Daclatasvir sofosbuvir, for Lidipasvir sofosbuvir, and also for Ombitasvir, Paritrapavir, and Dazabuvir. You see here these high response rates, which are largely in line with those data that have been reported in phase 3 clinical trials, which was reassuring. And some of these data have also been presented already as full publications. The maybe more important message from this real world target group is that the safety of all regimens was confirmed also in this cohort. So adverse events were surprisingly infrequent, and the majority were moderate or mild in severity, and discontinuations due to adverse events were infrequent. You can see here the respective numbers reported in the target group. It's very important to note that the selection criteria of patients treated with the different regimens differed, so it does not allow a comparison of effectiveness or safety between regimens. It's more the message that overall the number of serious adverse events was low for all regimens in that trial. Maybe more importantly, there have been also now data presented for different European cohort studies. So the Abacus trial, an Italian compassionate use study, has been presented for the first time in February at a national meeting in Italy. You can see here that more than 1,000 patients were enrolled in this compassionate use program. And here, and this is a major difference to the target group, this was from 176 sites across Italy, which is quite remarkable. And also it's important to note that the primary efficacy analysis was performed here in patients mainly with compensated cirrhosis. So patients with genotype 1 infection and compensated cirrhosis received here Ombitasvir, Paritrapavir, and Dazabuvir according to the labels. So 24 weeks mainly for genotype 1A and 12 weeks for genotype 1B. And remember, all of them had compensated cirrhosis. The majority of patients were already treatment experienced, and in Italy, as to be expected, the majority of patients was infected with genotype 1B. The primary efficacy analysis, I think, was remarkable again. You can see here that across genotypes, across the analysis, whether you look for ITT or per protocol analysis, you see response rates between 93 and also 98%, both for genotype 1A and genotype 1B infected patients. So showing that the real-life SVR rates in patients with compensated cirrhosis were comparable to those reported in the phase 3 trials, in particular the Turquoise 2 and the Turquoise 3 trial for the 3D regimen. So quite reassuring. Then this was Italy. Is Italy different from other European countries? We have also seen at EASL now data from a retrospective multi-center non-randomized cohort from Spain. There they reported data of more than 1,600 patients in Spain. And here you can see again these numbers of SVR of 96% SVR12. Another important finding was, and this is obviously in sharp contrast to the previous treatments based on interferon alpha, that only 1.8% of patients discontinued treatment. You can see also here that treatment was safe. The proportion of patients with serious adverse events was small. Some patients reported anemia, a few patients reported rash, and very important, which obviously is for any regimen containing a protease inhibitor, an issue, were there hepatic decompensations, which was a very low number considering the overall patient demographics and the number of patients, with only 7 patients experiencing hepatic decompensations, which is largely in line with the percentage of patients which you would expect anyway in patients not receiving antiviral therapy. There have been also a real-world cohort from France, the so-called ANRS cohort, which again is an observational cohort. Overall, they have now included more than 15,000 patients. Some of them have already an 8-year follow-up, so these were older treatments before. And here you can see that for the Simiprevir, Sofosbuvir cohort, they presented also data at recent meetings, and some of these data have also now been published in recent journals. So you can see here again pretty reasonable response rates for SVR12 and 24 for both for the Simiprevir and Sofosbuvir containing regimens with or without ribavirin. I would like now to focus on our German experience. We have implemented 1.5 years ago the German hepatitis C registry. This is a non-interventional prospective cohort study, and again, in contrast and indifferent to the target cohort, this were 233 sites across Germany. We have overall 9,300 patients included in our German hepatitis C registry, and of those, more than 1,000 patients now have received the 3D regimen or the 2D regimen with Omitasvir, Paritaprevir, and Dazabuvir. So this really reflects the treatment landscape in our country, in Germany. In Germany, roughly 80% of patients are treated by physicians in private practice, while 20% are treated by academic centers, and both academic centers as well as physicians in private practice participated in this cohort. I will show you now the data that have been presented for the FV regimens at the International Liver Congress. Holger Hinrichsen was the presenting author, and the data were considered by the EASL governing board as that important that they were presented in one of the presidential plenary sections in the main hall of the EASL Congress. So overall, we have here patients with cirrhosis included were roughly 22%. So only 22% cirrhosis, so 80% were non-cirrhotic, which reflects already our situation we have in Germany, that we can treat also patients without advanced fibrosis and cirrhosis, fortunately. We had roughly 60% of patients with 1B that received the FV regimen, but also 110 patients with genotype 4 that were treated with the 2D regimen in our cohort. The first question then was if this is really reflecting real world, if this is reflecting the treatment landscape. Are physicians in private practice, in the real world, following recommendations? Are they following the guidelines? Are they following the label? Or they go a little beyond these recommendations, maybe using 3D without ribavirin, maybe extending treatment because I want to be on the safe side? And what is highlighted on this slide in green is those patients that were treated actually according to the label. And this is, I think, quite important data that we can be proud about our German physicians, because they did a quite good job. The majority of patients was actually treated according to the guidelines. There were always exceptions. Some patients with genotype 1A for some reasons did not receive dazabovir, so only 2D. So I think overall treatment was quite good, but we will come back later to this. That is important also to stick to the guidelines, because if you do not so, then you may have problems and also reduce the likelihood of response. The next, and this basically is again the different distribution for the choice of treatment, whether this was in line with the label, yes or no. So what was the outcome of our German cohort? You can see again these quite boring graphs. Again, SVR rates 96%, 95%, 97%, and we cured all patients with genotype 4 in our German cohort. So quite reassuring. The efficacy data obtained in real world are in line with data that have been obtained in the phase 3 registrations. And now let's have a closer look into different subgroups. So what is about effect in patients cirrhosis versus cirrhosis? And what's about patients that were treatment naive or patients that have been exposed before already to other regimens? Overall, again, you can see here quite nice graphs. High response rates irrespective of the genotype 1A or 1B. What I want to highlight is the graph or the bar on the very right side of this slide. This is pretty interesting because you know that the 3D regimen contains a protease inhibitor, paricaprevir. And the guidelines in most countries recommend that if a patient has failed previous treatment with a protease inhibitor, you should not simply retreat with the same class, but try to switch classes. So, for example, the EASL guidelines recommend if a patient has failed a regimen with tenofovir or boceprevir, physicians, some of them did it anyway. With a protease inhibitor, they actually were in 48 cases retreated with paricaprevir and ombitazvir plus dazabovir, and the response rates are remarkable. 46 out of 48 patients HCV, and this is important data. For example, if you have a patient with advanced kidney disease, which may not be treated with sofosbuvir, but he has been treated with tenofovir and boceprevir before, so can I maybe then choose the 3D regimen for retreatment? You are not absolutely sure. And now we have data generated from real-world settings that this indeed may be possible. So for the first time, data on this subgroup of patients have been presented out of this German cohort. What about other special groups of patients which may be important? Safety of patients in individuals above the age of 70 years. We had a special poster from the German Hepatitis C registry on this specific subgroup of patients. You can see here treatment was very well effective, even in elderly persons. Treatment was also effective in patients with a BMI above 30. Treatment was effective in patients with viral loads above 800,000, as well as in HCV, HIV co-infected persons and in persons that were infected previously by injecting drug use. What is important, and I mentioned this already slightly before, that response rates seem to be slightly lower with only 92% in patients that were not treated according to guidelines and to the label. So there's a tiny little difference. It's not dramatic, but there's a 7% difference. And this highlights to me again the importance of sticking to the label and to the recommendations to really ensure full effectiveness of the drugs that we prescribe right now. Let's now have a closer look to the reasons for non-SVR. So what was the reasons why some patients, even though there were not many, did not achieve SVR? You can see here that virological relapses were very rare and occurred actually only in 6 patients in our cohort. There were some patients who had early discontinuations, and there were 7 patients where the investigators considered this as possibly related to the treatment, which is important. So there are some side effects, and in particular in patients with advanced liver disease, we have to be careful in any case. When we have a closer look to those guys who really had a virological relapse, to me this was a little surprising, because I expected that these virological relapses were all, let's say, cirrhotic patients with genotype 1A and other problems. But you can see here that we had also quite some relapses actually in non-cirrhotic patients. So only 2 patients or 1 patient actually had cirrhosis. So sometimes you really don't know exactly what the reason is. In this real world setting, we did not have had information on the baseline NS5A resistant variant present, so we don't know this yet, whether NS5A RAFs were present in these patients, but it's likely, according to the other data that emerged during the last 6 months, that this may have been a problem. But overall, virological relapse is a very small number and no distinct pattern explaining relapses in these patients. Safety signals, there were no major, let's say, surprises. I mentioned already that 6 patients discontinued treatment, possibly to adverse events caused by the study drug, but overall, this was a small number. And the conclusions of our German cohort was that the treatment regimen of Ombitavir, Paritaprevir, and Tazobavir was highly effective, both in genotype 1 and genotype 4 patients. We had these 6 patients who experienced the virological relapse, and overall the treatment was generally well tolerated, and the findings largely confirmed the safety and efficacy of this regimen that was presented in pivotal clinical trials. So I think I could show you that the randomized controlled trials, the data could actually to a large extent be replicated in the real world settings, in particular for genotype 1 patients. We saw not only in our German cohort, but also in other cohorts, very high SVR rates. We saw a good safety profile in genotype 1 infected patients, similar to those reported in the clinical trials. The question then is, which other clinical questions can be answered by these real-world experiences? And I think we are just in the beginning here to analyze this data in more detail. There are quite some questions which become very important. About other genotypes, I here focused in this presentation only on genotype 1 infected patients. There have been data on genotype 4 also for the 2D regimen presented. We have seen data at EASL also on genotype 5, for example, or genotype 6 even. We have seen an enormous amount of data on the importance of resistant-associated variants and maybe then even of retreatment of patients after DAA failures. We have data on other so-called difficult to treat populations, other specific genotypes, patient advanced disease, where we saw data during EASL. But maybe most importantly, the challenge is really what's about data with advanced liver disease, what's about patients who may have already child B cirrhosis, patients who have both advanced liver disease, so child B cirrhosis, but also impaired kidney function, and then problem these patients. So is it dangerous to use the protease inhibitor in a child B patient? Is it maybe more dangerous than using a nucleotide analog in patients with advanced kidney disease? And in the end, we need these experience settings to exchange our experiences, to choose the best treatment for each individual patient. So keep an eye on the data that are presented during the next meetings, and also generate your own data for you collect the data. I think it's very important that we use these very effective new drugs best way. They are expensive, but therefore we should be sure that our first shot really hits the virus, that we eliminate HCV, and that we improve the overall outcome of hepatitis. So hopefully, and I apologize for these few technical issues at the beginning of this presentation, I can summarize from my perspective that we have been treating many patients in Germany meanwhile with the new drugs. There were really no bad surprises. There are good options, but there are still some questions to be answered, and therefore these real-world experiences can be really helpful. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a successful conference.